Good morning, everybody. It's Friday morning. I'm genuinely excited this morning because it's edition 161, and Rose has come back. Rose, thank you so much for rejoining us. You were here last in September 2021, so 2 years have passed. So, Rose Marley, you're the CEO of Cooperatives UK, and it's a
Right.
great. Last night was a great day, wasn't it, for the cooperative movement?
It absolutely
Go on,
was.
Rose. You spill the beans.
Well, thank you for having me back, Frank and Stan. And obviously, we didn't know that I was going to be saying this morning, but last night, Cooperatives UK won Business of the Year at the City of Manchester Business Awards, which we're absolutely over the moon about. We were up against huge businesses, but one of the reasons I'm over the moon, like I say, I came last on this podcast just over 2 years ago, which was just when I started this role,
Yeah.
actually, and quite a lot of challenges. So there's a lot of kind of, internally within the business, there's been a lot of hard work to achieve that. So I'm really, really pleased that the team will get to see the results of that hard work. The member support that we've had has been brilliant, but actually the raising awareness about cooperatives as a business and being recognised as significant in the business community is really important because it's so difficult to kind of raise awareness of alternative business structures like cooperatives. So I'm just really, really pleased that this award's been given us the visibility and the chance to be able to do that.
Yeah, because we've spoken on this chat before about the lack of visibility of other business models, shall we say, at GCSE and A level, like in politics or economics studies. So it's great to see the cooperative movement getting a sort of platform, really,
That's it. That's
to
it.
challenge the existing sort of views on this sort of stuff.
And it's even more sort of scary than just like we're not on the curriculum, we're not in the sort of standard business teaching in things like chambers of commerce either, but actually in 2020 the government, the Department for Education, sent guidance out to senior leaders in health and relationship part of the curriculum to strictly instructed not to use any materials or information from organisations that are anti-capitalist. Well, that actually means you can't teach, for example, the history of the Labour Party. You can't teach trade unionism. You shouldn't be teaching cooperatives under that remit because, cooperatives and capitalists, it isn't for private gain. It's absolutely shared ownership and democratic control. So that's been a really worrying kind of culture wars, it feels
Mm,
like, in,
mm.
in terms of what's happened there, and very under the radar as well. I mean, the good news about it being under the radar is I don't know how many schools are
Well,
paying attention to
I was just about to say, I know
it.
that when I was the CEO in the Co-op Academies Trust, Connell College came on board. It was their 10th anniversary yesterday, and I was
Wow.
unable to attend, even though I wanted to. But actually, I spoke to the economics teachers at the college when they became part of the trust, and they expressed, sort of this desire to actually sort of extend the understanding of young people about cooperation, and they were saying, "Well, we ignore it,
Oh,
we
very
ignore
good.
it." So I was thinking, well, that's actually a really positive sign, that actually there is still sort of freedom amongst teachers to actually sort of push forward an agenda which probably is fair for the young people to have an understanding of all that's
Absolutely,
available. Yeah.
absolutely. So yeah, it was, without a doubt, disappointing. I am at the new Co-op Academy in Bellevue actually
Oh,
next
are
week,
you?
Frank. So I'm
Oh,
excited
wow.
to see that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, fabulous. Okay. Actually, we're going to go to Rose to what's caught your eye this week.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that's caught my eye, it's not specifically education related, but it really struck me. It was on Radio 4 Today program, and it was the guest was Patsy Stevenson, who was one of the women who had been arrested at the vigil of Sarah Everard. Um, and it really struck me. She cried on the interview because it was clearly the first time she'd been able to speak, because obviously when things are going through court and legislation means that you cannot talk about a case And I hadn't realised, as many other people, to what extent she just went to that vigil. It was a snap decision to show her support, and she wasn't a protester. She'd never protested before, and what happened to her was really scary, but also it highlights something that I observe within the public sector, actually, but it comes from the top. It's this idea of protecting institutions, and when an individual or somebody becomes, when somebody challenges that institution, often from a point of view of being a victim, that's really difficult to do, because the institutions put their weight of legal support behind, and a real kind of at best passive aggressive kind of practices to not allow those individuals to speak. And it's something that the mayors in the Northwest, Steve Rotherham and Andy Burnham, are campaigning for, and they're calling it Hillsborough Law, because obviously a similar thing happened there, but Grenfell and the post office, and this idea, this duty of candour, I find it shocking that we need to put in place a law that says public sector workers have to tell the truth. And I just think there's something in that. I mean, like I said, it really touched me and shocked me, and I felt her pain. But also, I think that's where it trickles down. A lot of your listeners are in education, and this will resonate, that kind of whistleblowing or challenging. And I think it's something we need to work on as a country, because, and again, like I've just touched on it before, freedom of speech is an absolute privilege and gift that we should protect with all our might. And people should be able to stand up to those institutions. So yeah, it really affected me, that news story.
It's funny. It's triggered something, a memory for me. Again, going back to my work with the co-op, I remember we had an education director who actually was very experienced, a bit truculent. Even he would admit that he was sometimes a bit of a loose cannon. But actually, and I remember an admin member of staff coming to me and saying, really, he shouldn't be speaking to you like that, And I was thinking, no, well, he should. I'm pleased that he feels able to, and feels safe in that environment. I don't see that. I never viewed it as a weakness. It was never personal to me. It was all about trying to improve. He at times he felt I wasn't hard enough or firm enough or driving this or driving that. And I thought that was, very helpful for me. So yeah, it's a minor thing compared to the Sarah Everard thing, but it sort of did trigger a need for leaders to be open to that sort of stuff, to welcome it.
Absolutely. And like I say, and sat within frameworks that not just allow it, but actively encourage it. And I think that's the paradigm shift we need to make. It's weighted in the other direction.
Yeah. Stan, what are you going to say?
Well, what's caught my eye is something that works on both sides of this. There's a All Saints Academy in Dunstable. They're going through a judicial review about their inadequate judgment, and Ofsted are clearly doing what they do and protecting Ofsted, so that they're playing the game of we will share what evidence. Or, I mean, just off record, I've just read a complaint response to a school where Ofsted refer only in the complete complaint to the evidence base of the inspector. At no point have they sought any extra or additional information from the school. So there is no point in that. So the inspector says this happened, and the next question is, well, the school's saying it didn't. Well, I look at the notes. Oh yes, you put that it happened. Yeah. Therefore, the complaint's overturned. And it's just bizarre. But what's changed at this school is that the Ofsted are now saying that some of the staff have been bullied into either not talking to inspectors or about what they've said to inspectors. And again, according to what Ofsted are saying, there's evidence that staff have been suspended until such time as they disclose what they've said to the inspector.
Wow.
Now, there's two institutions trying to I suppose, use their weight to support their reputation. And in the middle of it all, there are some staff who have since left the academy, I understand, who are in the middle of all that and unable really to fight their own corner against the weight of those two institutions. So it's a similar case of people, you know, and whistleblowing is, you know, it's a protected area of your life now. So you should be able to whistleblow, and you should be able to do that without any interference. But clearly, the reality of the world is that you can't do that, or you do it at your risk.
It's funny. I do. You know, I'm not a great fan of the current government around what it's trying to do with education, but I do quite a lot of work to prop it up. You know, so in effect, I do work for Blackpool and I do work for Liverpool Council, working on their education boards. And actually, I think at times you feel completely drawn, you know, because you think, oh gosh, you know, should I just walk away from all of this? You know, it actually feels so toxic that you feel as though all I'm doing is perpetuating this toxicity, in fact, making it worse, you know. But then you think, well, who am I actually walking away from? You know, you're walking away from some of the most vulnerable children and thinking, well, if my voice is lost, you know, and at times I feel constrained, and this is actually one of the reasons why I've decided to step away from the work in Blackpool. Not because Blackpool Council have been absolutely brilliant, and the DfE have never interfered with anything that I've said, but I just feel as though it's just a matter of time before they will. You know, and so I feel as I've been running on the ridge for quite some time.
I feel that, you know, and I think back, I was as guilty as anybody else when it came to inspection. I wouldn't say I bullied staff, but I can remember talking to one member of staff about music, which wasn't a particular strength at the time in the school, and saying, you know, look, I know and you know that music is weaker than the other subjects, but there's no need for the inspectors to know that. And when the inspection's over, we can do something about it. Which is effectively saying, please don't say anything to the
shut up.
Don't give your valid view to the inspectors unless they specifically ask for it.
I know. I mean, Rose, just to move it on a little bit, your two children are sort of at a transition point, aren't they, in education?
Yeah, that's right. So we're leaving the educate schools system. So I've got my son next week is going to York University, and my daughter.
What's he studying there?
He's studying international relations. So he did politics, economics, and history. And he did brilliantly in his A levels. And my daughter has just finished GCSEs, also did very well, and is going to Savarian College in Manchester. So no more school runs and school uniform for us, although I have spent a lot of money on Levi jeans to be the alternative school uniform.
Do you have a view on uniform, by the way, before we move on? Do you have a view on uniform as a parent? Forget the CEO role of the Co-operative UK. What's your...
Yeah, I do actually. I do think you know, we should be encouraging, you know, particularly, well, it's a challenge, isn't it? Because the supermarkets will provide, you know, the plain white shirts and the plain skirts and all that type of thing. And I think it's really important that we encourage that you can use the non-logoed items. But I do think the logos are important for purposes of, you know, identifying, you know, what school you're from, and that camaraderie and solidarity. So I'd like to see more kind of iron-on logos type stuff, or that, you know, or something along the lines of where you can make it, you can kind of make it that the basics of the school uniform are really, you know, as affordable as can be. But that you can kind of bring that you know, uniqueness of the school out, because it's often mottos and logos and it's what the school stands for. So a little bit of both, but also my in the school that my daughter's just left, she did have a uniform protest at one point, and they obviously...
Were you encouraging her, Rose?
Well,
Go on.
I was going to say they got the wrong parent, because when I got the call that Jess...
Oh, we know where this has started. We know who started this.
When I got the call that Jess was, you know, I had a petition going around school and all sorts of stuff, you know, I was like, yes, go on, Jess. But this, and one of the reasons I completely agreed with that, the specific rule was it wasn't just the color of the skirt, it was the exact material you had to have. Right. It was I can't remember if it could have pleats or couldn't have pleats. It was really, really specific in style and material, to the point where the teachers each morning would have an inspection on the gate, and they had to feel the material to check whether it was the right one. So it's not even that visible. And again, my daughter's very slim, so she couldn't necessarily get the ones, and you could only get them from certain shops and all that type of stuff. So she'd have to, this specific skirt, she'd have to kind of, I mean, she was very happy with this, but she had to roll it up and make it higher because it was too big for her. Get, and then she'd get in trouble because it was too short. And I just used to think, haven't you got anything better to do? Like, I know you've got things that you need to do. And you could see the teachers were frustrated that all this energy and effort was going into, they couldn't wear their hair up, they couldn't have, you know, like just, and then just monitoring all that. And then what a bad way to set up the day, you know, that you're instantly, you know, in a row with your teachers. And you know what, the bit that really frustrates me about that is the parents that cannot afford. You know, so one of the rules around the very specific black shoes, and they have to be the shoes and not more trainer style. And well, you're into, you know, a lot more expensive shoes then. And then, like, say you've got young people who, through no fault of their own, are not in this absolute pristine condition that the school wants you to be in. They're already in trouble at the start of the day. How does that set up their learning? And I just find that the inequity of it all so frustrating.
That's the key word, isn't it?
I read a piece yesterday, I can't remember where I read it, but it was somebody who's now an adult talking about, as a child, being punished for not having the right uniform, not having a supermarket skirt rather than the official one. And she said that she'd said to the teacher at the time, "You're punishing me for being poor."
And you know, not even just poor, just, you know, you haven't got the armory necessarily around you that, you know, that often young people have need. I've seen this with apprentices. I remember taking on one of our apprentices at Sharp Futures, and every day he came in a hoodie, like a coat style hoodie. And we were thinking when he started, oh, he's not settling in, he feels like he needs to leave. And you know, I was as bad as anyone. I'd be like, aren't you stopping, you know? Anyway, after about a week, the HR came into the campus where I was, and she said, oh, great news, he's taken off his hoodie. And I was like, brilliant. And she went, he's got another one underneath. And what I realized, and I was so annoyed at myself, what I realized was, not only did he not have the money, because we'd not thought to advance his wages, he had no one in his armory to say, you're starting a job, this is the kind of clothes you will be expected to wear, let's go out, let's get you sorted. So it's not just the cost often, it's the awareness of, you know, how important these things are. And like I said, if you've got a really challenged background, and you know, I've seen it again in schools, like it's been raining and they've come in like completely, you know, with clothes still damp from the day before because people can't afford to dry the clothes. There's so much around uniform that sets pupils up with disadvantage without even, you know, before they've even opened their mouths. And I just think that's the bigger picture that we need to look at.
I must admit, I was not a great fan of uniform, but in two different schools, I introduced uniform, and the impact of it was unbelievably positive. Simple ones, simple uniforms, you know, you didn't have to have the logo on the sweatshirt, but you could have a bottle green one from any of the supermarkets, etc. But the first time, which was in an inner city school, when we introduced uniform, which was a tie and a jumper, nothing else, the difference in those children in terms of their identification with the school, their pride, for the rest of the time I was at the school, which was probably 2.5 years, it was a completely different organisation. The children had this sudden pride in what they were doing.
Wow.
Mind you, Rose was saying that she's having to buy Levi jeans.
Well, so it's the new school uniform, the college uniform.
I diverted you away with the discussion about uniform, but you were going to say about your two children moving out of school. I mean, how's that working out for you?
Yeah, I've been quite reflective, really, sort of, you know, considering their Manchester state education. And I can't pretend I'm over the moon. I don't think they've had a better education than I had, you know. 30 years ago or so. And I do, when I say I don't think they've had a better education, there's some areas that are down to curriculum, there's some areas that are down to budgets, but also what I would have hoped by now is that the education system was starting to reflect the changing work environment and setting people up for school correctly with the right level of qualifications. No, you know, I'd like to say I employ lots and lots of young people. The qualifications aren't the important, but it's the attitude to learn, and it's the ability to learn and problem solve and skills. And we're not producing young people that can do that. In fact, we've gone backwards. We're spoon feeding too many young people. There's no self-responsibility, which is a really important skill for life.
Yeah,
That's interesting because we've got this week two private schools that have say they're moving away from GCSEs for that very reason. That I think the quote from the deputy is that GCSEs reward rote learning rather than deep and original thinking, and they don't teach children effectively for what employers and the modern workplace want. I think that's something Frank and I have said for some time.
I was taught. It's funny how all these, we must have been having the same sort of conversations this week, because I'm organising a conference in Blackpool for business leaders and secondary school college leaders, and you've got that sort of dichotomy really, where you've got people, those who say, well, it's about the qualification. If you don't give them the qualifications, they can't get the opportunities. And I look at it though on the basis that you're making an assumption that everybody has found the education ladder. They all found it at the same time. But actually, some kids still, even at 16, have still not found the education ladder. But we need to find a way in which we give them a set of skills, attributes that enable them to go into the work ladder and the education ladder. And you can see when young people who we were placing on work placements in the co-op headquarters, who'd never shook hands with anybody, who'd never introduced themselves, had never ever been responsible for making sure that a white shirt that they were wanting to wear was clean. They didn't actually know how to use the washing machine, how to iron, how to get, what they had to do to get on a bus to get into Manchester, how they found out what time that bus arrived, all of those sorts of stuff, and when they were introduced to people like Steve Morels, just couldn't hold that conversation with Steve. Steve had to do so much work to eke it out of these young people, but they had fantastic potential. The education system had delivered, was driving them towards exams, and ignoring at its peril really all those other bits of stuff that in the families that we live, our children have that. They see us do this all the time, but for me it's always it is that bottom third that I'm most concerned about, who are not getting, who feel at the moment as if education isn't for them, because they know they're not going to get a grade 4 in English and maths. They know that therefore means they're going to struggle to get onto T levels. It means they're going to have to spend another year doing English or maths as a course at the sixth form college. That it's not opening them up to apprenticeships. What are they? No wonder they're walking with their feet.
Yeah, I was going to say, and they're never going to enjoy the learning because they know that. So every day is a drudge.
It is.
If there's nothing there that says, "Wow, I want to get there because today I'm going to be doing this," or if that drive, that enthusiasm isn't driven in children to get to school in some way, then what's the point of going?
Yeah.
Well, I've got a question for you both on that actually, because I'm really interested in so Frank, the sort of more general skills aside, but understanding maybe what skills you need into different areas of work, and something that's being looked at in Greater Manchester is the idea of the MBacc, the Manchester Baccalaureate, where you look at groups, or look at areas of employment that are strong in the area, like advanced manufacturing, creative industries, for example, and then looking at advising young people about groupings of subject matters that enable them into that space. And I've got mixed feelings. I'm interested in your view, but I also experienced with my son at A levels. He did economics for the very first time at A levels. Absolutely loved it. He actually got an A star at A levels. but he couldn't go on to do economics at degree because he hadn't had maths. And not only did nobody tell him that, how would he have known he loved economics so much? I mean, that's glib saying he couldn't go on to do it, London School of Economics, which is where he wanted to go, because it was a BSc and he didn't have the maths. And it was the pandemic and all that, but something along that journey, a decision was made without even realize you were making a decision. So I'm really interested in what you think about that idea of highlighting, potential routes, and whether then you end up ruling out other routes,
Yes.
or whether you think it's a good thing to kind of make that more visible to young people at the options year. MBacc would be,
yeah. Well, go on, Stan.
I'm just going to say I do think we specialise far too early.
Yeah.
And so you don't get that chance to see. I mean, for my son, it was a fluke, and that's been what he's done ever since. That the college didn't offer him the course he wanted to, and he chose to do music technology, almost as a throwaway. Got into that so much that he's now a qualified music teacher. So it's a route that wasn't explained to him. Nobody said when he was doing his choices, do you want to do music? I don't think the school actually offered music, but that might be something that you might excel at later in life, and that wasn't an option, and it was a mere fluke.
Yeah, on the MBacc thing, for me, I just looked at the MBacc proposal, which has an academic and vocational route. Some subjects are in both, but some subjects are only in one. And for me, there is, picking up on the point Stan made, there needs to be a real meshing together of this. We've got ourselves into a position where we think that it's okay for children to just study sort of 8 subjects. And I remember when I had to leave during A-levels, had a lung condition, which meant that I missed about 9 months of schooling. And the school said, well, you'll have to go to a year below. And I thought, I'm not going to do that. So I left. And I remember going to evening classes and studying law and economics as part of my banking exams. Never studied law and economics before, but I really, really liked it. Really liked it. And I felt as though if I'd had that opportunity earlier, I think that might have shaped where I went to study. I eventually went to university, but it would have, I think, shaped differently where I'd ended up. And I think for me, it's around... her granddaughter's joined a school that has electives on a Wednesday afternoon, which I think is a really interesting idea. There's a range of subjects and things you can do. The thing she wanted to do is full, so she can't do it. But whatever. But I do think that's that flexibility and that freedom to study stuff that actually I hadn't thought about that. I think American universities do this very well, don't they? There's a whole range of courses that you can study. You're not restricted to, you've got to do this course, you've got to do that course. There's a real sort of meshing of that. You can create your own sort of course. So I think we need to see a lot more of that in schools.
I know this is old now, but if you remember the days when you were gifted and talented, and identified as gifted and talented, because in the school where my daughter was, it was because a number of teachers nominated you to be gifted and talented, but there were only 30 children in the year group that could have that qualification. And when she chose not to do art, or to do art rather than another subject, that knocked one of her teachers out of the thing. So they actually announced to her class with her there that she was no longer gifted and talented. Because of the subject she'd chosen.
Our son Dom was selected for a gifted and talented program, which was during the summer holidays, and that was a complete turn-off. So he called it SWAT school. There's no way I'm losing my summer holidays to go on SWAT school. But anyway, for me, it feels as though we've got ourselves. I mean, it's interesting. The government wants to we talked about the MBacc and some of the limitations of it, but the government's pushing the EBacc. And a key central pillar of the EBacc is a modern foreign language. Well, Rose, if you can get a modern foreign language teacher anywhere in the country, you're doing well. You know, I mean, and
Well,
where I work, you just can't get them. So schools have got very low EBacc scores, and oh, it's terrible. But actually, the cause of that is the government's recruitment of, or lack of recruitment, creating a career structure for a modern foreign language student to go into teaching.
well, therein lies the problem as well, that they've decided that a modern foreign language is
Yeah,
critical, because anybody that goes abroad now, uses, whatever form of translate. I mean, it doesn't even like what you can do with AI, what you can do. Actually, if I was saying you need to learn a language, I'd be saying you need to learn a coding language. It'd
yeah,
be, as useful, if not more. And it's just a real, and that one does frustrate me. And the idea of keeping you on in maths, that it was because those are subject matters. I was never good at foreign languages. I was never good at any good at maths. And that would have been a huge switch off, to me in that period, to be told you had to learn something. So, like you said, that, Frank, the idea of being able to have an enriched curriculum and try things, and that goes through life as well. There's
yes,
plenty of roles and jobs I've taken, normally out of necessity, to be fair, that aren't my preference subject matters, aren't something that I think I could excel at. But it challenges you, and you learn lots, and you actually find areas that you do like. And I think, like you say, bringing more of that, what real life is like in the workplace, into the school environment, which can often be, suddenly you're being asked to be, the health and safety officer because you're in a small business and you know nothing about health and safety, and suddenly you've got to become an expert. Those kind of things, we don't, like you say, our education system doesn't allow that agility.
no, that's a good
Changing your
word.
mind is a bad thing. That's life. So yeah, is anyone doing it well at a kind of secondary school level? I know you're talking about the American universities there, but internationally, is any curriculum allowing that level of and the other thing is that our young people now bite size and snack, and they're very used to getting small bits of
Yes,
the
yeah,
T levels is that, isn't it? It's the idea of being generally good at a lot of things, and then having a vertical that you're
yeah,
really good at. So I kind of like the idea that you can try a bit of everything.
yeah.
Mm.
I think that I'm not. I think we're constrained in the UK. I mean, it's interesting the point that Stan was making about Latimer School wanting to create their own sort of qualification. That's driven by a restricted approach towards the limitations of the current exam system. And actually, when I've gone overseas and looked at other approaches, you do generally see a greater range of opportunities. And actually, the government advisors always refer back to places like Holland, Netherlands, which is actually very similar to the structure that we have traditionally in the UK. And that's always their first port of call. But actually, when you look at greater flexibility, even around Nordic countries where children start school a lot later, it's less structured. That getting, it's very sad, isn't it, when children come out of nursery and then they go into reception. Even at that point, we're wanting them to conform, and the range of subjects narrows down quite quickly.
Well,
In
I told
primary
you, Frank,
schools.
we had a nursery inspected, and the inspector wanted to see the reluctant readers. He wanted them to put a group of reluctant readers together. You just think, what are we doing?
Well,
And I think just on the baccalaureate, I
yeah,
mean, I may be the most cynical amongst us here, but doesn't the baccalaureate actually reflect what Michael Gove thought was important rather than anything else?
yeah, yeah,
Because there's no arts in it at all,
yeah.
no humanities, I don't think,
No, there is humanities in
and
there.
there's no RE.
Yeah, there's no RE. Yeah. I mean, if ever there was if ever you were saying to somebody in the current world that we don't think teaching RE is quite a significant subject, I mean, that's quite startling. And also
Yeah.
the fact that on the MBacc, just going back to that, computing sits in the vocational arm.
Yeah, well, I was
You know,
saying music with the furore over the last night of the proms, and the British tradition, everything. The academic side of doing a music GCSE is really quite challenging,
yeah,
and yet to write that off as
I know.
not being a subject that's got enough rigor to it.
Hey, look, we've got 2 minutes before we finish because Stan's off to do some childcare, and I'm sure Rose has got other things to do today. But I just want to pump in with my what's caught my eye, if I may, and that really is about the BTECs. And so the whole discussion today has been about post 16, really, isn't it? A lot of it. But here we've got the government wanting to push young people into A levels, T levels, or apprenticeships. Now, A levels are well established. That for me, that those are the one. It's not a gold standard. It just happens to be the more academic tend to do A levels. The T levels are meant to be a bridging post where some of the academic kids would want to do that because they're technical qualifications. But some major problems with the rollout of the current T levels. We can't find. I do a lot of work in Blackpool. We're going to struggle to get businesses to pick up on the numbers. And the number of T levels currently being rolled out is relatively small compared to what the full program looks like. I just can see it falling over. And the apprenticeships, I mean, where have they all gone? It's not as if we're on the back riding a crest of a wave with loads of apprenticeships being driven through the system. They're simply not there. But the government doesn't want to admit that there's got a problem with its T levels and with its apprenticeship program. So it's just, as somebody said, playing fast and loose with post-16 education at the moment. We need desperately, somebody was suggesting that we have 155,000 students next year or the year after who will not have a course to go on. And some of those will be some of those children who didn't find the education ladder until quite late in life. And those are the young people that I have the greatest concerns for, who seem to be excluded because they're struggling to get a grade 4 in English or maths or whatever it may be. Well, they will eventually. Give them time, they might. But actually, what we must do is not close down learning opportunities for them. So for me, it's a mistake. Keep the BTECs. If you think T levels are going to work, let's give them time to bed in. I personally think they're great, but I think it's going to be like other programs. There's just not enough businesses able to pick up the slack on it.
But also, Frank, there's a challenge there to businesses, and it does bring us beautifully back to cooperative businesses, because what is often being asked, particularly of small business, whether it's the T levels or even the apprenticeships, the detail of the expectations of the employers, it's often the detail that stops the enablement. I know there's lots of examples where employers benefit out of, say, for example, apprenticeships, but actually the backbone of this country is small business. And
Yes.
actually apprenticeships don't work that well. The way the levy works isn't helpful to small business. So there's lots of things about it, but I do think, and the reason I'm commenting on cooperatives is all cooperatives operate under a set of values and principles, and principle number 5 is literally the responsibility of education. And I do think that we should be considering in all business forms the responsibility of education and the role that business is expected to play. And actually, let's say, whether we could do that through tax incentivization, yes, or whatever, but that we kind of make it more attractive to businesses to want to train our young people, because actually there's a lot of older people in the market. We've got an aging population. Young people haven't got the skills. So employers have to work really hard at page 1 skills, like, oh, yes, you do have to come in every day, or, yes, or whatever those rules are that they've not been shared. So I'd love to see not the onerous on business, because I think that's there. I think the empowerment and the enabling of business to actually be part of that pathway and support, that's what I think would make the difference, particularly with T levels. It's
interesting in Switzerland, I don't know, I was invited to, Switzerland has quite a good connection with Manchester. There's quite a number of major Swiss businesses have bases along that Oxford Road corridor. And I've been invited on a few occasions to lunches and dinners and things. But what's clear is in Switzerland, the business community see their role as an educator. They don't see it as, oh, well, they do expect something from schooling, but actually it's not a case of the finished article is delivered to us and we can now mold it into what we want it to be. Mm-hmm. It's very much around, understanding the range of young people that are going to be joining the business and trying to accommodate that and to work with what they've got. It feels much more enlightened than we have. Anyway, that's where it's gone. Stan, you've got 1 minute before childcare. So we've got to finish. We've got to finish. Rose, thank you so much for joining us again
Thank you,
this
Rob.
week. And next week it is Alwyn Pugh. I got it all wrong last week. Alwyn Pugh, a former HMI, is joining us, so we look forward to that. And also just one thing, we had a great chat with a parent and probably future governor at Caversham Primary School in Kent, where unfortunately the head teacher committed suicide after an Ofsted inspection, and that was posted yesterday. And I'd urge anybody who hasn't viewed it to view it, because it's very insightful and also quite worrying, what happened and what have you. So I'll push you towards that. But thank you, Rose, and
Thank you.
all of you have a great day. See you,
Thank you.
folks.
Bye.
Bye bye.